Born in Los Angeles, raised in Nashville, Thomas now lives in Pittsburgh. He was inspired by the Slovenian poet Tomáš Salomon, whose work he's to some degree translating, editing, working with, and has arranged to be published in the magazines Crazy Horse, Chicago Review, Denver Quarterly, and American Poetry Review. Thomas Kane attended Yale as an undergraduate and has an MFA from the University of Pittsburgh. His poems have appeared in the journals McSweeney's, Parthenon West Review, Bat City Review. Bat City Review, by the way, is from Austin, and those of you who are familiar with Austin would know that there's a bridge in Austin that is in which lives millions of bats who go out every night. This is why it's Bat City. Bat City Review, Harp and Altar, and on versedaily.com. Thomas reports that he's working on a series of short poems that draw from an atlas of world history which was recently lent to him and never to be returned. You can explain that. Thomas Kane.
I did not anticipate the owner of that atlas to be present tonight, but lo and behold, there he is. It's still probably not going to get returned. The first poem I'm going to read is called Pearl Bryan, who was, I'm pretty sure this is a historical fact, the victim of a particularly gruesome 19th century murder. It's called Pearl Bryan. To be pregnant by a dentist and beheaded by a dentist is a miserable fate. To be woefully giddy for the wrong carriage ride, to be missing, to be unequaled in mistake-making, to have a river dragged and all for naught, to return home and find it changed, to be always awake, to misname, to think it so when it is otherwise, to raffle off your artifacts, to conceive of unbecoming, to be a toy or a pet falcon, or a likeness, or a palsy. These are all miserable fates. And this one is what to make of the cavern, what to make of the tumult in the cavern. I was inconspicuous as the first created. Sabrina and her crocus were as I saw them. Sabrina and her whisk, Sabrina and her mink shoes, Sabrina and her catalog of every little thing. I had been 103rd acts, and Sabrina said, "We are lovers only as the air loves the air." And I did not sleep, but named the air, and lullabied the air, and found for the air birds that circled the air as proof of a necklace. And I invented belief. I invented the light by which boats pass. I invented the clasping of hands and the clasping of teeth against hands, and song, and the middle of night wind. And what is known of me is that I invented the filling of rooms with newborn snow. And this is called EYA, My Little Owlette, for which Longfellow deserves credit for those side-by-side exclamations and not me. EYA, My Little Owlette. EYA, My Little Owlette. Let's handle each other. Let's make believe this tincture can work. Once, at his most vulnerable, George Washington invited a milkmaid back to his tent. She read aloud to him each of his wife's letters. She called him my dove, my coney, as Martha always would. She rubbed the devil out of his war-beaten back, and he confessed to all the ways Valley Forge could play tricks on a man's heart. And this was not an indiscretion, but more like how we remember the wonder of circulation by a fresh wound. which is why we can say now that our mischiefs are forgivable. Nowhere near as bad as grave robbery. 1, I burn leaves where I probably should not. As the leaves glow is your skin shine. 2, you keep a lover's crocus on the river bottom, as there is something of new birth in tending a garden. And consider each of our alternatives. George Washington wraps himself in his deer skin and weeps. I never again burn leaves. You live flowerless. It is the difference between the molded impression of teeth and the molded impression of no teeth. Because you are sunk, you accept the role of crook. Because I've seen the entirety of your body, I go back for more kerosene. Because George Washington has loved himself into a tizzy, he does all he can to approximate the sensation of loving oneself into a tizzy. And this one comes from a series of poems, I guess instructional poems, one of which is the one over there. And this one is called Howto is All This Sensation. When one is a lock of hair, when one is the story of Augustus the Younger, testing his eyes against the eyes of an egret, against the eyes of a newborn serpent, before deciding finally, Livy is a song flute, Virgil is a racing horse, my father sighs at the mere mention of conquest. When one is the way we learn that 3 people might shudder alike at the unison breath of a cattle car, at the touching of saddle skirt to flesh, at a video of 2 people dancing. And it is the same principle by which we say, make of my name the low hum of a catacomb, and later say, make of my name a chorus line, an alternation of tides, an unwelcome bout of night tremors. Augustus the Younger gussies up for bedtime. He eats 1 spoonful of apple preserves. He swoops his arms in the shape of a perfect circle, thinking, today I will know the velocity of a rain cloud by the breathable fur, the act of crossing stitches by the breathable bulb. And here's another set of instructions. How to a sestina. And once Thomas Kane was inconsolable, all ready to be fussy and even at dust light. To a river and to a June bug swallowing a river, he said, to think of all the things I can't repeat. The revelation of the lantern, my 3rd plum season, a cuttlefish right at feeding time. And why, again, can each sestina not begin? I've been asked to advise you that there is a human skeleton, without limbs, limbs to follow. A limb maybe for waking, a limb for shivering at the nearness of a garden snake, a very large limb on which to scratch our favorite prayers. Because how else are we to understand the poem but by making it a body? The body can have all kinds of names. It can grow to be a wedding dress or a little corridor and this poem is Periods of Abeyance. Think of winter ghosting a field machine, ghosting a town made profitable by a mermaid. Think of the last half century at Crispus Attucks High School. If leaves given at equal intervals to a moving creek, think of the time spent considering only the pale water. Think, I will 6 months pine for a larkspur, 6 more for an Italian ice. Think king, no king, king. This is Tokyo Bay, July 8th, 1853, which is about the time that it was entered by Commodore Perry, and to which a certain atlas is beholden. Tokyo Bay, July 8th, 1853. To communicate with the entirety of a mystery state requires giving up to the water the contents of your tinderbox, requires an understanding of the sacred rites of harbor life, the ceremony of being watched, the ceremony of being held aloft, the ceremony of a dressing maid, a candied plum, a national wound. And this last one is Howto, a prime mover. So I made Thomas Kane from scratch, easily and almost as I would the very lesson of a homespun parable. Something like, with enough turns of the wrist, look, a layer cake. And because he is part insatiable, he will receive daily gifts. A butterfly net and a lariat for his collecting. A sieve because he must learn to differentiate the haypenny from the actual artifact. And having been asked to read of excess unreproved, having dreamt that night of knowing it against his flesh, he woke and for a gift begged only that the till be withheld. By design, Thomas Kane is enamored of many things at once. An empty dance floor and a pitch pipe, a nesting doll's identical blue dresses, a church sign that begins, a family that prays together, and another that begins, in the valley of my brethren. By design, he is made to imagine all his loves into one place, unapologetic in this need for nearness. Which is all to say, Thomas Kane is taken by permanence. Once, he skated his favorite shapes into an iced river, later cursing the thaw which vanished them. So think of him as you would the boy who faints and weeps at drawn blood, who has a rusty old box for cast-off fabrics, who inscribes each past tree with the promise to return.